The night Alara was supposed to die, the moon had other plans. She knelt in the center of the sacred circle, wrists bound with silver chains that burned against her skin, while Alpha Cordon recited the ancient words of sacrifice. Around her, the Shadowpine pack watched with cold eyes, their faces illuminated by torchlight that cast dancing shadows across the clearing. Alara had stopped begging hours ago. What was the point? She was an Omega without a wolf, a defect in a world that valued strength above all else. For 23 years, she had been nothing but a burden, a reminder of weakness in a pack that prided itself on producing fierce warriors. Tonight, they would finally be rid of her, offering her life to appease the moon goddess for the pack's recent losses in territorial disputes. Alpha Cordon raised the ceremonial blade, its edge gleaming silver in the moonlight, and Alara closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But the blade never fell. Instead, the full moon above them suddenly blazed with impossible brightness, bathing the entire clearing in ethereal silver light so intense that wolves cried out in pain, covering their eyes. Alara felt heat explode across her chest, searing and absolute, and when she looked down, she saw silver light pouring from her skin, forming intricate patterns that spiraled outward like living vines. The symbols were ancient, a language older than any pack, older than the current kingdoms, a script that belonged to the age of myths. The chains binding her wrists shattered, falling away like dust, and power surged through her body in waves that made her gasp. She had never felt anything like this connection to something vast and cosmic, as if the moon itself had reached down and touched her soul. Alpha Cordon staggered backward, his face pale with shock and something else. Fear, perhaps, or recognition of something he had only heard in old stories passed down through generations. The mark on Alara's chest pulsed, with silver light, and suddenly she understood what it meant, knowledge flooding her mind like memories that weren't hers. This was the seal of awakening, the mark that appeared only once every 500 years, bestowed upon the one chosen to find and resurrect the last of the primordial Alpha Kings. The bloodline everyone believed extinct. The ancient rulers who could speak directly to the moon and command every wolf through the primordial bond that connected all their kind. Alara felt the pull immediately, a magnetic force tugging at her very essence, pointing north toward the lunar mountains, toward something that had been sleeping for centuries, waiting. The pack erupted into chaos around her, wolves shouting and arguing, some calling for her immediate execution, others falling to their knees in reverence or terror. Alpha Cordon's expression shifted from shock to calculated greed as he realized what she represented. If he could control her, use her to awaken the primordial king, he could seize unimaginable power, could rise from a minor pack leader to a force that could challenge the great kingdoms themselves. But Alara didn't wait to become his tool. The mark on her chest had given her something she'd never possessed. Not a wolf exactly, but something else, a fragment of ancient power that let her move faster than any Omega should be able to move. She ran, crashing through the forest with wolves howling behind her, their pursuit relentless. She had no plan, no destination except away, but the mark burned hotter with every step, guiding her north with an insistence that felt like destiny itself, pulling her forward. She ran through the night and into the dawn, her body somehow not tiring, even though she'd never possessed any supernatural endurance before. The mark was sustaining her, feeding her strength from some cosmic source, and with that strength came visions, flashes of memory that weren't hers. She saw a warrior king with eyes like molten gold, commanding armies of wolves that moved as one perfect unit. She saw a throne room carved from moonstone, where the primordial kings had ruled with wisdom and power that kept all the packs in balance. She saw betrayal, a conspiracy of lesser alphas who feared the absolute authority of the royal bloodline, who poisoned and plotted until the last king fell. She saw him being sealed away rather than killed, because even his enemies feared the cosmic consequences of murdering one touched by the moon itself. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel For more supernatural romance content, drop a comment below telling us what you think will happen when Alara finds the Lost King. Your support helps us bring you more amazing stories like this one. Now let's continue with Alara's desperate journey. 3 days later, exhausted and hunted, Alara reached the border of the Lunar Mountains, a treacherous range that marked the edge of civilized pack territories. Beyond this point lay the Forbidden Lands, regions so dangerous that even the bravest alphas refused to venture there. Legends spoke of ancient magic that drove wolves mad, of ruins from the old kingdom that were cursed, of creatures that predated the current age of wolves. But the mark on her chest burned with such intensity now that she knew her destination lay somewhere in those peaks, hidden where no one had thought to look for 5 centuries. She climbed for 2 more days, following the pull of the mark through narrow passes and across glacial streams, until she found it. The entrance was concealed behind a waterfall, a massive door carved with the same symbols that now adorned her skin, covered in moss and ice, but still radiating faint power. When Alara touched the door, the marks on her chest flared, and the ancient seal recognized her, recognized the right it had given her. The door groaned open, revealing a descending staircase carved from living rock, lit by crystals that still glowed with captured moonlight after all these centuries. The tomb was vast, a cathedral hollowed out beneath the mountain, its walls covered in murals depicting the glory of the primordial kingdom. Alara walked through chambers filled with artifacts, weapons forged from celestial metals, armor that seemed to shimmer with contained power, libraries of books written in the old tongue. But she was drawn deeper, following the pull until she reached the central chamber. And there, she found him. Kael, the last primordial Alpha King, lay on a raised dais surrounded by crystals that formed a preservation matrix. He looked like he was merely sleeping, not dead, not decayed, perfectly preserved as he had been the night of his betrayal. He was massive even lying down, his body that of a warrior king built for battle, his face stern and handsome in the way of ancient statues, all sharp angles and strength. His hair was black as midnight, long enough to pool around his shoulders, and even unconscious, he radiated authority that made Alara want to submit and kneel. The mark on her chest burned so intensely now that she cried out, falling to her knees beside the dais, and silver light poured from her body, flowing into the crystals surrounding him. The awakening ritual happened without her conscious direction, her body moving on instinct or perhaps guided by the moon's will. She placed her hands on his chest, and the symbols on her skin transferred to him, silver light tracing the same patterns across his body. She spoke words in a language she didn't know she knew, ancient phrases that resonated with power. The crystals shattered one by one, their energy flowing into Kael's body, and his eyes snapped open, glowing molten gold with the power of the primordial bloodline. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, Omega and King, the one who had nothing, and the one who had lost everything. Then Kael surged upward with a roar that shook the entire mountain, power exploding from him in waves that would have killed Alara if not for the mark protecting her. He was disoriented, confused. The last thing he remembered was the poison in his wine, the betrayal of those he trusted. And now he was awake in a tomb beneath a mountain, with a strange Omega girl glowing with marks that bore his family's seal. When Kael finally focused on Alara, his eyes narrowed with confusion, and something that might have been wonder. He could feel it. Immediately, the bond that now connected them, an unbreakable link forged by the awakening ritual. Her life force was tangled with his, sustaining him as he slowly regained his strength, and he knew instinctively that if she died, he would return to sleep, possibly forever. This Omega, this small, fragile creature who trembled before him, had become the anchor tethering him to the waking world. He tried to speak, but his voice came out rough from centuries of disuse, and he had to clear his throat several times before words formed properly. He asked who she was, what year it was, what had happened to his kingdom. Alara, terrified but unable to run because of the bond, told him everything. 500 years had passed. The primordial kingdom had fallen, The royal bloodline was believed extinct. The world had moved on, reorganizing under new dynasties, and he was nothing but a legend now. A story parents told children about the old days when kings could command the very moon. Cale's reaction was not what Alara expected. He didn't rage or despair. Instead, his expression became calculating, dangerous. The look of a warrior assessing a battlefield and planning his strategy. He had been betrayed once because he trusted too easily, believed too readily in the honor of other alphas. He would not make that mistake again. He stood, testing his body, and found himself weakened significantly. The preservation spell had kept him alive, but at great cost. His power, once absolute, was now diminished, and he would need time to rebuild it, time to recover what had been stolen from him. He looked at Alara again, really looked at her, and recognized the bloodline in her scent, faint but unmistakable. She carried royal blood, diluted through generations but still present, which was why the moon had chosen her for the awakening. She was descended from his sister, the last queen, who must have survived the purge and hidden among common wolves. This Omega was his distant niece, family, the only other royal blood left in the world. The bond between them pulsed with strange energy, and Cale realized it was more than just a tether. The awakening ritual had created something unprecedented. A mate bond, but twisted, amplified by ancient magic and royal bloodline. The moon had not just chosen Alara to wake him. It had chosen her to stand beside him, to be his queen in the restoration of their line. The implications were staggering. Traditional mate bonds were strong, but could be rejected. This bond, forged by cosmic will and ancient ritual, was absolute. They were bound together in a way that transcended normal pack dynamics, and Cale found himself both frustrated and intrigued by this development. He had ruled for 2 centuries before his betrayal, had taken lovers and produced heirs, but he had never found his true mate. And now, after 500 years of sleep, the moon presents him with this terrified Omega who glowed with his family's power. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. Before they could process this strange new reality, they heard sounds echoing from the entrance above. Alara's pursuers had finally tracked her to the mountain, and from the volume of voices, Alpha Corden had brought significant forces. Kyle's eyes blazed with golden fire, his weakened state making him irritable and dangerous. These wolves dared to hunt what was his, dared to threaten the one person keeping him anchored to life. He might be diminished, but he was still a primordial king, still possessed power that would make these modern alphas weep. He told Alara to stay behind him, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of absolute command that no wolf could disobey. Even weakened, the authority of kingship was woven into his very essence, and Alara found herself obeying without thought, her body responding to centuries of genetic memory that recognized royal command. Alpha Corden entered the chamber with 20 of his strongest warriors, all armed, with silver weapons and blessed chains meant to bind supernatural creatures. When he saw Cale standing there, alive and awake, his eyes went wide with a mixture of terror and greed. He had hoped to find the tomb and control the awakening himself, to bind the ancient king to his will through magical contracts before consciousness fully returned. But Alara had beaten him here, had awakened the king properly, and now Corden faced a creature of legend that had no reason to show mercy. Corden tried. Diplomacy first, bowing low and speaking in the formal tongue of pack alphas, offering alliance and support if Cale would recognize Shadowpine's territorial claims and grant them favor in the new order. It was a reasonable offer, politically sound, but Corden made one critical mistake. He referred to Alara as property, as a tool Corden had generously allowed to fulfill her purpose, and suggested she be returned to the pack now that her usefulness was complete. Cale moved faster than any of them, could track, crossing the chamber in a blur of supernatural speed, his hand closing around Corden's throat with crushing force. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made every wolf in the room whimper and submit involuntarily. dropping to their knees under the weight of his primordial authority. He explained very clearly that Alara was not property, not a tool, but his bondmate, marked by the moon itself, carrying royal blood, and under his absolute protection. Anyone who threatened her threatened him, and he had very creative ways of dealing with threats. He demonstrated by tightening his grip until Corden's windpipe collapsed, then released him to fall, gasping to the stone floor. The message was clear. The age of petty alphas treating omegas as disposable resources was over. The primordial king had returned, and the old laws would be enforced once again. Corden and his warriors fled in terror, spreading word throughout the territories that the impossible had happened, that the extinct bloodline walked again. Within days, the supernatural world erupted into chaos. The established kingdoms viewed Kale as a threat to their power, a relic that should have stayed buried. The oppressed omegas and lower-ranked wolves saw him as potential salvation, a return to the old ways when kings protected all wolves regardless of rank. Secret factions that had waited centuries for this moment began to move, some supporting the restoration, others determined to finish what their ancestors started and eliminate the royal line permanently. Kale and Alara found themselves at the center of a brewing war that would reshape the entire werewolf world. We hope you're loving this supernatural romance adventure. Don't forget to like this video and share it with fellow romance fans. Comment below with your predictions about what challenges Kale and Alara will face next. Subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of their journey. Now, let's see how our couple navigates the dangerous political landscape ahead. Kale established a base in the ancient tomb, using it as a fortress while he regained his strength and assessed the current state of the world. Alara became his guide to modern times, explaining how pack structures had evolved, how the kingdoms were organized, how technology had changed daily life. Kale was a fast learner, his ancient mind adapting quickly to new realities. But what fascinated him most was Alara herself. She was nothing like the omegas of his time, who had been cherished and protected as valuable members of pack society. This modern Alara had been brutalized and diminished, taught to see herself as worthless, and yet she possessed a core of steel that had survived years of abuse. She had run when she should have cowered, had found his tomb when armies of trained warriors had failed, had awakened him when the ritual could easily have killed her. She was stronger than she knew, and Kyle found himself wanting to show her that strength, to help her reclaim the dignity stolen by inferior alphas who knew nothing of true leadership. The bond between them grew stronger each day, fed by proximity and shared purpose. Kyle felt himself drawn to her in ways that went beyond the magical connection. She challenged him without realizing it, questioned his assumptions about the modern world, forced him to see that 500 years of change meant he couldn't simply impose the old ways without understanding the new context. Alara, for her part, found herself fascinated by this ancient king who treated her with more respect in a week than her pack had shown in 23 years. He asked her opinions, listened when she spoke, protected her not out of obligation, but because he genuinely valued her presence. The mate bond hummed between them constantly, a living thing that wanted consummation, wanted them to complete the connection fully, but both resisted, knowing that intimacy would complicate an already complex situation. They needed to focus on survival first, on building power and allies before indulging in personal desires. Their first major challenge came from the Council of Five Kings, the ruling body that governed the largest werewolf territories. They sent an official delegation demanding Kale present himself before the council, submit to authority verification, and accept vassalage under the current power structure. It was an insulting demand, asking a primordial king to bow before those who ruled only because his line had been eliminated. Kale refused, sending back a message that made his position clear. He recognized no authority above his own, acknowledged no kings except those who could prove their right to rule through strength and wisdom. If the council wanted his submission, they were welcome to come and take it by force. The challenge was unmistakable, a declaration of independence that the council couldn't ignore without looking weak. The council's response was to declare Kale an outlaw, placing a bounty on his head large enough to tempt even loyal wolves. Assassins came in waves, mercenaries and zealots, Young alphas seeking glory, and established warriors offered fortunes for the king's death. Kale killed them all with brutal efficiency, using each attack as an opportunity to demonstrate his power to the watching world. Word spread of the ancient king who fought like a legend come to life, who could command wolves through sheer force of will, whose golden eyes blazed with power that made even the bravest warriors submit. But killing assassins was defensive. To truly reclaim his throne, Kale needed to go on the offensive, needed to build a power base that could challenge the established kingdoms. He started with the outcasts, the rejected and abandoned wolves who had been cast out of traditional pack structures, omegas who had fled abusive situations, betas who questioned the current hierarchy, even some alphas who saw the corruption in the system and wanted change. Kale offered them something radical, a return to the old code where rank was based on merit and contribution rather than birth, where omegas were valued for their unique gifts rather than treated as property, where leadership meant protecting all pack members rather than exploiting them. His words spread like wildfire through the underground networks, and wolves began making dangerous journeys to the lunar mountains, seeking to join the growing rebellion. Ilara became instrumental to this growing movement, not as a figurehead, but as a genuine leader in her own right. Her experience as an abused omega gave her credibility with those who had suffered similarly, and her bond with Kale meant she could speak with his authority when needed. She organized the refugees, established training programs, created support systems for traumatized wolves learning to live without constant fear. Kyle watched her work with growing admiration and something deeper, something that felt dangerously like love. She was becoming the queen he needed, not through any conscious effort, but simply by being herself, by caring about the wolves who came to them seeking sanctuary. The bond between them pulsed with increasing intensity, demanding completion, but both continued to resist, knowing that once they crossed that line, everything would change irrevocably. The turning point came during an attack by the Northern Kingdom's elite guard, a force of 200 trained warriors led by Alpha. Commander Darius, a legendary fighter known for never losing a battle. They surrounded the mountain fortress at dawn, confident that superior numbers and modern tactics would overwhelm the ancient king and his ragtag collection of refugees. But Kyle had spent weeks preparing for exactly this scenario, had trained his followers in the old ways of warfare, had turned the mountain itself into a deadly maze of traps and defensive positions. The battle lasted 3 days, and when it ended, Darius knelt in submission before Kyle, his army broken, his pride shattered. But instead of executing the commander as expected, Kale offered mercy, offered a choice. Return to the Northern Kingdom and report honestly what had happened, or stay and learn what true leadership meant, what the old ways actually represented before they were corrupted by fear and greed. Darius stayed, becoming one of Kale's most valuable converts, a respected warrior whose defection sent shockwaves through the established kingdoms. If someone like Darius, loyal to the core, could be turned, then Kale's message was more dangerous than any military force. Other high-ranking wolves began to question their allegiance, began to wonder if maybe the old stories were right, if maybe the primordial kings had ruled better than the fractured system that replaced them. The Council of 5 Kings realized too late that they were facing not just a military threat, but an ideological one, a challenge to the very foundations of their power structure. As Kale's influence grew, so did the complexity of his relationship with Ilara. The bond between them had evolved beyond simple magical connection into something profound and terrifying. He found himself thinking about her constantly, worrying when she was out of sight, feeling genuine joy when she smiled. These were not the calculated emotions of a king managing an asset, but the vulnerable feelings of a man falling in love with a woman he couldn't have, shouldn't have, because the power imbalance between them was too great. He was an ancient king, a legendary warrior, a creature of immense power. She was a former slave, an omega with no wolf, someone who had known only abuse and rejection. How could he pursue her romantically when she might feel obligated to accept him because of the bond, because of his authority, because she had nowhere else to go? Ilara struggled with similar doubts. She felt the mate bond pulling at her constantly, felt desire and longing that was both her own and amplified by cosmic magic. But she couldn't be sure what was real, what was her genuine feeling versus magical compulsion. Did she want Kale because the moon had chosen him for her? Or did she want him because of who he was, the man beneath the legend? He was everything she never knew she needed. Strong but not cruel, powerful but not oppressive, commanding but willing to listen. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before, valued not despite being an Omega, but because of everything she was. But did he see her? Or did he see the bloodline she carried, the utility of her bond, the political advantage of having the moons chosen at his side? The questions tormented her, making her withdraw emotionally, even as the physical attraction grew stronger. Their tension finally erupted during a strategy meeting, where Kale announced plans to directly challenge the Southern Kingdom, the most powerful of the 5 ruling territories. Alara argued it was too soon, that they needed more time to build forces and secure alliances. Kale dismissed her concerns with royal arrogance, stating that his tactical experience surpassed her understanding. It was the wrong thing to say, reducing her to the ignorant Omega others had always treated her as, and Alara exploded with rare fury. She pointed out that his experience was 500 years outdated, that he kept making decisions based on a world that no longer existed, that his pride would get them all killed if he didn't start actually listening to advice instead of just pretending to consider it before doing whatever he wanted anyway. The assembled wolves watched in shock as the small Omega challenged the primordial king with words that would have gotten anyone else executed for insubordination. But Kale didn't rage or punish. Instead, he went very still, his golden eyes fixed on Alara with an intensity that made the air crackle with supernatural energy. Then he dismissed everyone from the room with a gesture, waiting until they were alone before speaking. He told her she was right, that he had been arrogant, that he needed her perspective more than he wanted to admit. He confessed that he was terrified, not of the kingdoms or the battles ahead, but of how much he had come to depend on her, to need her, to want her in ways that had nothing to do with the mate bond or royal bloodlines. He admitted that he had been keeping emotional distance because he feared taking advantage of her, feared that she would accept him out of obligation rather than genuine desire. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable, the ancient king stripped of his armor and revealing the man underneath. Ilara's response was to cross the room and kiss him, pouring into that contact every frustrated feeling she had been suppressing for weeks. The mate bond exploded with approval, silver and gold light swirling around them as 500 years of loneliness met. 23 years of longing for genuine connection. They made love there in the strategy room, urgent and desperate, the consummation of the bond creating a supernatural phenomenon that every wolf in the fortress felt, a wave of power that declared to the world that the king had found his queen, that the royal line would continue, that the moon approved of this union between ancient power and modern strength. When it was over, they lay tangled together on the floor, and Kale whispered against her hair that he loved her not because fate decreed it, but because she was brilliant and brave, and everything he never knew he needed. Alara responded that she loved him too. Loved him not because he was powerful, but because he was trying so hard to be better, to rebuild something good from the ashes of the old kingdom. The completed mate bond changed everything, amplifying their connection to levels that let them share thoughts and emotions, feel each other's presence across vast distances. But more importantly, it unlocked something in Alara that had been dormant her entire life. The royal blood that had been diluted through generations suddenly activated fully, responding to the presence of a full-blooded primordial king. Her wolf emerged finally, not a normal wolf but something ancient and powerful, silver-furred with eyes that glowed with lunar light. She was revealed as not just an Omega but a royal Omega, a category that hadn't existed since the fall of the old kingdom, possessing unique abilities to soothe and command that complemented Kale's more aggressive powers. Together, they formed a complete unit, the perfect ruling pair that the moon had intended when it first blessed the royal bloodline millennia ago. With Alara's transformation, their forces grew exponentially. Wolves who had been skeptical about following a relic from the past now saw undeniable proof that the moon supported the restoration. The mark that had appeared on Alara during her sacrifice now blazed permanently on both their bodies, visible proof of cosmic approval. The Council of Five Kings tried desperately to counter this development, spreading propaganda that Kale had used dark magic to create an illusion, that Alara was a puppet controlled through manipulation. But too many wolves had felt the power surge when the bond completed, had witnessed Alara's transformation firsthand, and the lies found no purchase against obvious truth. The final confrontation came during the Gathering of Alphas, an annual meeting where the major powers assembled to discuss territorial disputes and policy. Kyle crashed the gathering uninvited, walking into the council chambers with Alara at his side, both of them blazing with royal power that made every wolf in attendance instinctively want to submit. The Five Kings tried to have them removed, but their own guards refused to move against the primordial king, the genetic memory of royal authority overriding years of conditioning, to obey their current masters. Kyle laid out his demands simply. The kingdoms could either accept his sovereignty peacefully, restructuring under the old code with him as High King, or they could face him in the Trial of Kings, an ancient ritual of single combat where leadership was decided by divine right. 3 of the 5 kings chose submission immediately, recognizing that fighting was futile and that cooperation might preserve some of their power and status. 2 chose pride over wisdom, accepting the trial challenge, confident that Kale was still weakened enough to defeat. They were wrong. The trials lasted less than an hour total. Kale's combat prowess so far beyond modern alphas that the fights were almost embarrassing to watch. He could have killed both challenging kings easily, but instead left them alive and broken, examples of what happened when inferior wolves tried to challenge cosmic authority. With the old kingdoms dissolved, Kale began the work of rebuilding society, according to the ancient principles that had made the primordial kingdom strong. The epilogue comes 5 years later. The restoration has been challenging, requiring patience and compromise as Kyle learns to blend old wisdom with modern reality. The new kingdom functions as a federation of semi-autonomous territories, each led by proven leaders regardless of rank, with Kyle and Alara serving as High King and Queen, who adjudicate disputes and enforce the core laws protecting all wolves. The rigid hierarchy of Alpha, Beta, Omega has been softened, replaced with a merit-based system that values contribution over birth. Omegas are no longer property, but protected and valued community members whose unique abilities in diplomacy and emotional support are recognized as genuine strengths. Alara rules beside Kale as a true partner, her perspective and experience essential to creating policies that prevent the abuses she suffered from ever happening again. She has established networks of support for vulnerable wolves, created education systems that teach the true history of their kind, and personally intervenes in cases where the old attitudes of oppression persist. Her transformation from abused slave to powerful queen inspires countless wolves to believe they can overcome their circumstances, can become more than what others told them they were limited to being. Kale has mellowed with time and love, learning that true strength includes admitting mistakes and accepting guidance. He still possesses the absolute authority of a primordial king, still commands respect that borders on worship, but he wields that power with wisdom tempered by Alara's compassion. Together they have produced 2 children, both carrying the full royal bloodline, ensuring the succession is secured. But more than biological heirs, they have created a legacy of leadership that shows power must be balanced with responsibility, that strength means protecting rather than dominating, that love can transform even the hardest hearts. On quiet nights, they stand together on the palace balcony carved into the lunar mountains, looking out over the kingdom they built from ruins and rebellion. Kyle holds Alara close, marveling at how the moon knew exactly what he needed, knew that 500 years of sleep was necessary so he could wake in the right time to find the right person. Alara rests her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, grateful that the night she was supposed to die became the night her real life began. The world had said the primordial bloodline was extinct, had declared the age of kings over. But the moon had other plans, and through the bond between a lost king and a rejected Omega, had restored balance to the wolf world and proven that true love can awaken even the most impossible destinies. Thank you so much for watching this epic tale of supernatural romance. If you enjoyed this story of Kale and Alara's journey from ancient legend to modern love, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more amazing werewolf romance content. Share this with friends who love powerful love stories with fantasy elements. Drop a comment telling us your favorite moment from the story, whether it was Alara's awakening, the first battle, or the moment they finally completed their bond. Your engagement helps us create more content like this. Until next time, may you find your own impossible destiny and the courage to awaken it.